what to do before your trade deadline. It is fast approaching, everybody. Hey, some leagues, you know what? Trade deadline's open all the time. That's great. A lot of this stuff is still going to apply to you. So let's get into it. Nate, do you have, we're talking strategies, mistakes that we've made, anything, players, buys, sells, whatever. Nate, what do you want to start with today?
Yeah, I want to start with a strategy. If you have a trade deadline in your league, that means you're going to lose access to players
It's
for a
true.
couple months. And, that's obvious. But think about that. If you lose access to players, that means you're missing out on when they're breaking out or when their value is changing. And if there's a player that you feel confident is going to be breaking out at the end of the season and you don't acquire them now, you're going to have to be paying a higher price later. So the best way to get ahead of that is to go acquire them now. There's obviously a couple players out there that, you might have interest in that are willing to, hopefully break out. But also I think this is a good time to maybe go after some rookies that haven't broken out yet, because everyone wants the rookies to take off right away. Sometimes rookies don't break off until what? The second half of the season, Mike? Oh
You would
man.
have thought.
Wow. Or maybe their sophomore year, their second year in the league. This is the time, I think, if you have a trade deadline, to buy low on some of these rookies who haven't hit yet. Now, obviously, it's risky because I'm going to name some rookies who haven't hit yet. And there's a reason some of these guys haven't hit yet. They're not going to hit. They're unfortunately probably going to just continue to lose value. That's how this game goes. A couple of these guys you can buy low now. You're going to have a turnaround in value. And all of a sudden, maybe you buy a guy like Jonathan Mingo, who's been seeing a ton of snaps for the Carolina Panthers, but it's kind of hard to develop when the wide receiver room around you really isn't helping you. I mean, Adam Thielen's been great, but that offense has not been good. But Jonathan Mingo, I mean, he might not work out, but also you buy him right now. He's a wide receiver 80 or something like that in rankings. He just has a decent end to the season, and all of a sudden you have a top 40 wide receiver going into the offseason. That's how quickly things can change in Dynasty. So some other rookies I think you can go target that, we're hoping can, break out maybe this season or just have a better situation going into next season. Bryce Young, guy I'm happy to buy low on. I understand the results haven't looked nearly as good as CJ Stroud so far, and even Will Levis has looked great at times, but if you watched him this past weekend, he didn't look nearly as great. He's going to have his ebbs and flows as a rookie. Bryce Young doesn't look like Zach Wilson out there. He doesn't look like not a good quarterback. Bryce Young looks like a good quarterback. He just looks like a team that isn't helping him out. So I'm happy to go acquire him for like a late first. I think there might be some leagues you might be able to get him for 2 seconds actually. Jonathan Mingo, Demario Douglas, a guy I'm really liking right now. He's starting to break out, so your window is about to close if you have a trade deadline. Trey Palmer, guys who's made some noise in Tampa Bay. Cedric Tillman, Browns traded away. Donovan Peoples-Jones. Xavier Hutchinson's been getting out on the field for the Texans. He hasn't done much yet, but getting on the field with a quarterback who's young and exploding, always a good thing. A.T. Perry scored a touchdown this past weekend with the Saints. And Charlie Jones. We love Charlie Jones, and we talked about how he was going to be valuable in the offseason after Tyler Boyd leaves in free agency. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. So that's a guy you can go acquire too, because you're going to lose access to him next couple of months.
Maybe another guy that you want to hit on if you want a really cheap guy going into the offseason, or is just a backup, maybe Mac Jones. Maybe he gets a fresh start somewhere else next year.
Maybe Kenny Pickett, maybe Matt Kennedy gets fired. I can only hope.
One mistake that I've made and I still make is I hold on to players too long because I feel like I can get better value or I just like them a lot. And I've been burned a lot of times because I'm greedy and because of my former inability to engage with my league mates. But look, here's a good example. I have a team where I have both Pat Freiermuth and Dallas Goedert, players that we like here at the Dynasty Rewind, especially Pat Freiermuth. And I got some really good package offers for them. And I turned them both down because I felt like I could get more and I really like these guys. I do still believe in these players long term. This is just an example for you, okay?
Yep.
What I would have gotten if I moved either of those guys is more than what they're giving me right now sitting on IR. Not saying I should have moved both, but I should have strongly considered at least one of those packages more. I still have Cade Otton, who's been doing decently enough for me in a fill-in role, but I could have gotten, I know at least one of those, I believe, got it. There was a first-round draft pick in there. My first-round pick in that league was Quentin Johnston. I could have gotten a better first-round pick. Nate, what do you have next that you wanted to discuss?
Kind of in the same vein, trading for players who are about to enter free agency. Because once again, we're going to lose access to these players for a couple months. And when your trade opens back up, when your trade deadline is gone and you can trade again after the Super Bowl or whenever it is, football is over. Football is over, Mike. So people, what's next? Free agency. The draft's, of course, coming, but before the draft is free agency. So the first thing on everyone's mind is now, well, who's a free agent now? People aren't thinking about who's going to be a free agent this offseason right now. No one's thinking about that. But when you can trade again, they will be. And that will be the first thing on everyone's mind. So you got to be ahead of the game. Now, unfortunately, this year's class is not stock full of great free agents. It's not a great class of free agency for fantasy football unless you're a really big fan of Ryan Tannehill. We can still go after these guys because situations will change. Those, of course, going to be other things. But let's look at these free agents for next year. So we got Tyler Boyd, who we know has been a very productive wide receiver. You can get Tyler Boyd for cheap. And that's because a lot of people don't like wide receiver threes on teams, even though Tyler Boyd has been very productive. Mike, if you want to bring up his stats right now, you can tell us how productive Tyler Boyd has actually been recently. And I know T. Higgins has missed some time, but Tyler Boyd's a good wide receiver. And we've seen it with Christian Kirk. When we went to a different team, got elevated. I don't know if Tyler Boyd can get quite to that level, but give me Tyler Boyd as a wide receiver too on any team. I'm going to be happy picking him up for what I assume you probably can pick him up for like a late second right now. Tyler Boyd.
Last week against Houston, 8 catches for 117 yards. And the week before that, 3 for 56. That's 8.6 points.
Yeah.
And last week is more than that. I'm not doing that math. But look, Tyler Boyd's the number 3 in Cincinnati. That doesn't mean he's going to be the number 3 somewhere else. He could be the number 2. If Tyler Boyd was a New York Giant, he'd be the number 1 wide receiver off the rip.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tyler Boyd's a guy that's going to be a free agent after this year. Mike Evans is going to be a free agent after this year. And the Buccaneers might want to look a different way. So, I mean, I know Mike Evans is getting old, but he's still uber productive. I would love to see him somewhere for the next 2 years. They could be productive. Kirk Cousins coming off the injury, but also going to be a free agency. There's also some guys going into free agency. Maybe you should sell before the trade deadline. And some of those guys, Tony Pollard, I know it's a hard sell right now, but it's not going to get any easier unless he takes off. But at this point, you got a trade deadline. You got to make a move now. You know, he's on a 1-year deal in Dallas. He's coming off that injury, and he hasn't looked nearly as explosive as he used to. The Cowboys do not need him. Honestly, like his efficiency, they can go find a different quarterback, running back at this point. So Tony Pollard, a guy I'm looking to sell. Curtis Samuel, I know you love Curtis Samuel, Mike, but
I'm a fan.
If he's not on the Commanders, not sure if I'm as excited about him because they seem to love him there. Or maybe you want to buy Curtis Samuel. If you're Mike, you're probably buying Curtis Samuel, hoping for a new situation. I don't know.
Maybe he could get re-signed too. I mean,
and all my Dotson shares would be so sad.
Oh, man, he's starting to worry me.
And then Derrick Henry, another pending free agent.
I want to talk to you about a player that I'm buying. I didn't say he was a buy low. I'm just saying a player that I'm willing to buy. It's Miami Dolphins wide receiver Jalen Waddle. So for him, he's having a proverbial down season. If you're listening and not watching, I'm doing air quotes with only 59 catches, 522 yards, and 3 touchdowns. But look, he's also paired with the number 1 wide receiver in the NFL, and Tyreek Hill. By the way, Tyreek Hill, just insane what he's doing this year. He did miss a game this year with a concussion. We've seen what he can do in the past. He's still on pace for over 1,000 yards. I like what Miami's building, and I feel like that Waddle is about as affordable he's going to be. Saying that he's as affordable as he could be is like saying I bought an Audi, but you buy the cheapest model. Just because it's cheaper, it doesn't mean it's cheap. I would try for a solo first. It's not going to happen. Or I would do staggered first, like I like to do, a 24 and a 25 first. I would also consider if I can move on, upgrade from like a T. Higgins. Even though I did in the last pod say that I'm willing to buy, I'm using T. Higgins to upgrade here, or Devonta Smith, guy who still has a bright future. But I just think Jalen Waddle might have a bit of a brighter future in store for him than a guy like Devonta Smith does. Devonta Smith has more targets that get hogged by guys like A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, when healthy. Right now, Jalen Waddle only really has, I guess, Raheem Mostert. And look, hey, we can't
the main competition, Mostert.
And of course, Tyreek Hill. So that's a guy that I'm looking to buy. Nate, what else about you? What are you looking to do? This is one that I like as well.
Another trade strategy here at the end of the deadline. I'm going to say the same thing again. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but we're losing access to these players, and we got to stay ahead of the game. Injured players, when the season ends, their value shoots up, and it continues to go up all off season as you get the training videos. Look, Nick Chubb just finished his ACL repair, so back in September, they fixed his meniscus and his MCL. They just went through and fixed his ACL. I always shout out Jeff Mueller on this show, one of my favorite guys on Twitter for injury analysis. And because he said it sounds like this is a repair, not a reconstruction,
Good.
Sounds like Nick Chubb could be a full go by week 1 of next season. And if not, we would definitely expect him to be pretty productive, by mid-season. He could be a league winner next year. And people are going to understand that when it gets to July and August. So you got to get ahead of the game now. You can get Nick Chubb right now. Maybe you can get it for a third plus a late second. Certainly, I think you can get Nick Chubb right now, someone trying to get him off the roster or a player of similar value. Yeah, so I think this is a great time to go after those injured players. Nick Chubb, J.K. Dobbins, another one, Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones, possibly if you just really need a quarterback and you can find someone who's just willing to move off him for super cheap. When I mean super cheap, I'm not a big Daniel Jones fan myself, but he's got a big contract. I don't know what that means with the Giants possibly having a big, a nice draft pick. I don't know what to think of Daniel Jones. If I'm going to buy him, it's going to be for a late second, and that's about it.
I have a question about this strategy before we move on.
Yeah.
Is this for rebuilding only teams, or would you apply this to any team rebuilding?
Yeah, I think this can be any team, especially going after a player like Nick Chubb, Kirk Cousins, that doesn't really fit a rebuilding scenario,
Sure.
Even J.K. Dobbins. But if you're a contending team, maybe this isn't really looking like your year, but you have a good setup for next year as well. That's when a guy like J.K. Dobbins, a guy like Nick Chubb, I feel strongly about more with Nick Chubb because I know what team he's going to be on next year. But Nick Chubb, if you're a contending team next year as well, pretty good target because you're going to get the value out of it. If you trade a second round pick, which you expect to be late for Nick Chubb, he's going to be in your starting lineup next year. You're going to be really happy you moved the second round pick for him.
I like all these guys, honestly, if you're getting them cheap. I have no problem with making those moves right now. And hey, sometimes next year's championship is started this year. You got to always keep building. My strategy here is I started setting my lineups Tuesday morning. I don't know why I always used to wait till Thursday to set my lineups. All I would do is shoot myself in the foot week in, week out. Now I set it Tuesday mornings. I see any holes in my lineup right away. I could hit the waiver wire as soon as possible, or I have time to make some moves before the next week technically begins. Because looking at your phone on Tuesday, some leagues are different. Some leagues, like right after the game ends Monday or early Tuesday morning, it flips over to the next week already. Or on Tuesdays, sometimes it still says, it'll show that you're still kind of locked into the previous week. Every league is different. I think it goes a lot by how waivers go too, is how it rolls over on sleep. So, and here's a good example. One league I saw I had a hole at wide receiver, and the waiver wire was bad. And my best option, Zach, was Isaiah Hodgins on the bench. So I made a move. KJ Osborne for a third. KJ Osborne from the Minnesota Vikings. And he got me like almost 10 points that week. Now, I did win that week, and it actually wouldn't have mattered. But it's nice to know that I made that move. And, hey, it didn't matter, but it got me more points in points for. And that does matter.